Hello, and welcome to the Exchange Podcast. I'm your host, Ari Hirschberg, Director of Digital Community and Engagement at the Exchange Lab. I have a question for you. Ever feel like you're drowning in communication, noise, and clutter? I know I do. Today I'm joined by special guest Giles Turnbull. Giles is an expert on clear communication and working in the open. He's a former member of the UK Government Digital Service and an ex-journalist and the author of the Agile Comms Handbook. In our conversation, Giles shares tips to help us all communicate more like humans do and work with leaders, teams, and individuals to plan better ways of communicating about work in progress. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Welcome, Giles.
Hello. Thank you for inviting me on.
Our pleasure. Really happy to have you on. The live stream was fantastic, and I'm looking forward to delving in a little deeper in the podcast.
Good. Me too.
Okay. Question one. So, you work with organizations to help everyone at all levels communicate like humans do. I'm curious, what did you think this was going to be like before you started?
I had no idea. I was freelance when I was a terrible journalist, which is one of the things about my career in journalism is that I wasn't very good at it. But I was freelance for a while then, and finding work was hard. And so before I went freelance again to do what I'm doing now, I was quite worried, and I thought, how am I going to find enough work? Where am I going to find my clients? In the end, I found quite a few clients because I don't know if this applies in Canadian government circles as much as it does in British ones. I expect it probably does apply. But working in government is actually a relatively small community. And once you know a few people and you've met a few people, then you keep meeting similar people or the same people in different circumstances in different government departments. So basically, once you know a few useful people, it's easier to find work in the longer term. So the short answer is I didn't know how it was going to go. So far, it's been going quite well. And the crucial thing was that I learned such a lot when I was at the Government Digital Service between 2012 and 2016, I think, were the years that I was there. And it was an incredibly intense and rich learning experience being part of that team and meeting so many wonderful, talented, clever colleagues who taught me such a lot. And it was essentially using what I'd learned there and turning that into some kind of self-sustaining business was the goal. And so far, that's been reasonably successful.
That's great. I entered the government in 2017, and I had the same experience. As soon as you meet one or two people, they introduce you to more. I still can't get over how friendly people are in government and how everyone wants to. It's a true team in my mind. It's to me, it's a really cool place to work. So yes, and it just starts going exponential after a while, and it's shocking. And the second part is working in the UK for the Government Digital Service. When I started the Exchange Lab, we copied you. We still look at your work. Your group was so far ahead. It was so that must have been such an exciting time. Even though I'm sure, like you said, I didn't say the word, but exhausting because it's just so much.
Yes, both exciting and exhausting. And there were many, many more people at the Government Digital Service in the UK who were far closer to the most important things than I was. My job was, as I've said many times before to all sorts of people that I work with these days, GDS was governed by a set of design principles. And the 10th one on that list of 10 principles was make things open, it makes things better. And I was part of the team that was there to make things open. So our job was to help all the rest of the other teams around GDS communicate about their work to the people that needed to hear about it. And those people were mostly other civil servants in other government departments. They were the most important audience, but also important audiences included people like ministers, local politicians, citizens to a certain extent, but not so much. We weren't really aiming at citizens so much in terms of comms. The thing that was aimed at citizens was delivery. It was, let's give these people a better service on the internet, and the quality of the service will speak for itself. We won't have to promote it or sell it to people because it will do that job all by itself. And that was absolutely the case. Yes, it was exhausting. Yes, it was incredibly exciting. And like I said, I learned such an enormous amount.
So neat. And to the point with the citizens, we don't market to citizens either, but it's about the delivery. But somehow, because we're in the open, citizens get to hear things like this podcast, the live stream, because there's this interest that's starting to snowball. It creates more and more interest outside even.
Absolutely. And this is human communication in action already. Being more open is making your work more accessible. It's a way of making the behind the scenes bits of the work more accessible. One of the things I often describe is how organizations tend to work in silos. All big organizations work in silos. This happens all the time. And working in the open is a way of cutting a little window in the side of those silos so that people can peer inside. They can look and say, oh, that's interesting. That's what's going on in that silo. I never realized. And then they can find out.
And it's exciting for them to find out for a lot of people because they are stuck in this spot and it's like, oh my God, there's another world.
Yes, precisely. The whole point of the problem with silos is that not only do they wrap work up in blocks that don't talk to each other, but they wrap work up in blocks that are opaque. You can't see through them. And people constantly, one of the biggest causes of communication problems that I encounter when I go and work for an organization is that people in team A don't understand what people in team B are doing because they can't see it. And so their usual tactic to deal with this problem is, well, we're going to have to ask team B. We're going to have to pick up the phone or type a message on Slack or send them an email. We're going to have to talk to somebody to find out. And one of the things that I try to do to help teams is, well, what if you found a way to tell the outside world beyond your little silo what you're doing with text and pictures? It's really simple. Write down what you're doing as you're doing it, and then people will, and put it in a place where people can share it. At GDS, I think one of the biggest things about the way GDS did things, one of the most inspirational things, is that GDS published as much as possible in the public domain on the open web, because that was the lowest common denominator. It was the easiest place to publish in such a way that teams right across government could access what you'd published. And that is almost always the case. I see it everywhere in all sorts of very large organizations or governments. It's a case of, well, how are we going to publish something? You know, we've got our SharePoint set up and we've got Google Docs, but you know, I can't. What am I going to do to make these things public? And I always end up saying, well, the open web is probably your best bet.
Yeah, it's pretty fantastic. I'm with you. What was it really like to do the work? Like, what was the difference between the thinking and what into doing?
It was driven by a team, and the team. One of GDS's great catchphrases was the team is the unit of delivery, which is one of the best catchphrases that GDS came up with. That one didn't even come out of our creative communication team. That came from someone else. I think it came from a guy called Paul Downey, who came up with that and drew a little cartoon on a sticky note, which remains to this day one of my favorite images from the time. The work of communication was driven by this fantastic team of creatives. So we had producers, writers, filmmakers, photographers. At one point, we even had our own web developer to make some stuff on the internet for us. We had designers. We approached communication in exactly the same way that the product teams were approaching product design and service design. We took every communication problem from first principles, starting with the question, well, who needs to understand what? And how much do they already know? You know, can we assume any prior knowledge? Sometimes you can, you see, in government, because you're talking to other civil servants. So sometimes you can communicate in such a way that recognizes that those civil servants already have some background in certain subject areas. But sometimes also we had to assume the answer to that was they don't know anything. Well, we will assume zero prior knowledge, in which case we will have to explain the very, very basics of whatever it is we're talking about. It also meant that like when content designers are designing content for web services, we had to choose, or we got an opportunity to choose the right medium for the message. So sometimes we would write text and pictures and put them on the internet. That was usually the most common approach. But sometimes we would take a communication problem and we'd say, this feels like it should probably be a video. Because, I don't know, for example, the need is to explain how a particular service changed from point A to point B to a relatively small audience of about 300 people who are just going to be assembled in a conference room in a few months' time. Let's make a video for that and put it up on a big screen. Sometimes we could meet those communication needs in other ways as well. Like, for example, just delivering a presentation. And in which case we would say, okay, well, we've decided the need is to make a presentation. So we're going to make the best darn presentation that we can. And we're going to make amazing, informative, beautifully designed slides. And we're going to practice and rehearse and make sure we find the right speaker to deliver the presentation, and so on and so on and so on. So every single communication problem was treated like that. It was a case of understand the nature of the problem, design something that meets that problem. It was, like I've said, not just exciting and exhausting, and also a learning process for me, but it was also something that opened my eyes to so many new ideas and new ways of doing things.
I bet. I mean, to start, I'm going to talk to one of our designers to see if we can do that sticker of the team is delivery. I just love it. It's just like it should be. It's such a good, I think the word's mantra, because it's so easy to, even though you're thinking about going in the open, delivering as a team, you almost have to see that over and over again just to keep remembering that it's much bigger than you. It's much bigger than the team beside you. It's the whole group around you that's going to be able to do it. It can't be done by one group.
Yeah. The beauty of that phrase, the unit of delivery is the team, is that it works on all the levels. So we could use it to describe the work of GDS as a whole, which over from 2010 to 2016, it grew from a team of about 12 people to a team of something like, 600 people, something like that. So we could talk about that team, but you could also apply exactly the same mantra to any of the individual product or service teams working within it. Every team was a unit of delivery, and there were very many successful ones as a result.
Yeah, definitely lots of successful ones. And I also like how your team that you worked with really focused on, what is the right message for what we're doing, whether it be a presentation, whether it be a video, whether it be writing. And I'm sure there was quite a other things to do that you had in your tool chest that you would go through as well. I really like that thinking around that.
Yeah. And like I said, it steals the same concepts from the world of content design. So any of your listeners who happen to work in content design will be familiar with the idea that you can't design content until you understand what the needs are. So we definitely tried to understand needs. The problem we had was that when you're communicating about work, it's quite hard to actually get a list of needs written down, because you can't really do user research. You can't assemble your group of 300 people in your conference 3 weeks early and analyze their needs and then deliver something at the conference. You have to guess, which is not what content designers and user researchers would like us to do. But one of the reasons for I wrote a book, as some of your listeners might know, and I called it the Agile Comms Handbook. And part of the thinking there is that comms should be able to iterate just as much as products do. And it should be possible for a team, again, all the levels of team, a big wide team or a small focused team, it should be possible for a team to communicate something, test how well it did, make a judgment on, was that a good bit of comms or could we have made it better? And then iterate next time and use what you've learned each time.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I really like it. Okay, so you talked about weak notes in the live stream. What are weak notes? Because I don't know if we had a good definition for it. I want one for the listeners because it's really a powerful tool. And do you recommend having them on a platform that is searchable?
Right. Weak notes are a broadcast mechanism for teams. Let's put it that way. Let's imagine that you are a product owner and you are working on, I don't know, some bit of digital government somewhere. And you are a product owner working with a team of, let's say, about a dozen people. You have a very clear product that you're working on. You know everything there is to know about your product. Everybody on your team is highly engaged and motivated, and everybody's working towards the same goals. And it's brilliant, great team. However, you find out that 6 months into working on this thing, you find out that there's another team in another bit of government who are doing something almost the same as you, but not quite. And this problem crops up again and again. There are other situations where weak notes are helpful when leaders don't understand what teams are doing, because leaders tend to be incredibly busy people. Weak notes are a broadcast mechanism. They help teams to tell the rest of the world what they're up to as they go along. And when I say the rest of the world, I mean you could be just telling the rest of your colleagues in government. You could be telling the rest of the people who work in the same building as you. You could be telling the entire world, the general public. You could be publishing on the open web. Some teams do, some teams don't. Who you're aiming at doesn't really matter. The point is that you are solving a problem. You are meeting a need. And the need is usually, as a busy leader with too much on my plate, I need to understand what the teams who report to me are doing. Or as a team working on problem X, I need to know if my work affects any other teams in government, or how my work affects any other teams in government. Or I want to share what I'm doing so that other teams in government can compare notes with what I'm doing. So I see weak notes as a way of letting a team write down in very simple terms, very brief terms ideally, what they're up to on a regular basis. They're usually called week notes because weekly feels like the best cadence, the best rhythm for most teams. It doesn't have to be. You could do fortnightly. You could do every sprint. I'd say monthly is probably the minimum. Once you get into the rhythm of writing week notes, there are benefits that accrue over time. And this is one of the things that I think people often, they feel like this is a bit of a barrier to overcome. People might, or teams might start writing week notes, and after 3 or 4 weeks, they come back to me and they say, no one's reading this. It doesn't feel like anything's happening. What's the point? And I will often say, the point might not be visible or relevant for another 12 months. But building up that archive of thoughts over time is where the real value lies. Making sure that someone in the future can look back through the past and see where your team was 3 months ago and compared to where your team is, or maybe even where your team was 3 years ago compared to today. That is a valuable comparison to be able to make. It's also incredibly valuable when your team changes, because teams do, right? People leave, new people join. This happens all the time. What better way to help a newcomer who has just started on your team than to give them like a curated list of the 10 most important bits of week notes that they should read? You know, if you want to catch up on our last 3 years of all the highs and lows, the disasters and the successes, go and read these particular week notes, because these are the best ones. And if you've got more time, you know, read some others in the archive. Delve, you know, dive in, have fun. I think that's an incredibly valuable gift to give to any new member of a team. One more thing before I come on to the searching bit. Week notes are also useful for leaders or for individuals. And I have worked with quite a few individuals who have made good use of week notes. I've seen them used by senior leaders as a way of holding themselves to account in front of the people who work for them. Again, this is a broadcast mechanism for that individual. I've also seen them used by much more junior individuals, almost like a diary of learning. If you picture yourself as a newcomer to a particular job, what better way to document all the things that you pick up week by week than to write a few notes on a Friday afternoon and stick them somewhere, ideally somewhere where relevant people can see them. I think it's so valuable, and I see people doing it. I bang on about week notes a lot, as you can probably tell. I have occasionally inspired people to actually start week noting as a practice. And every now and again, I saw someone just today, in fact, just earlier today, I saw a guy who came to one of my training workshops here in London, and he came this summer, and he's just written his 21st week note. And I was really delighted to see that. And he's mainly documenting just a bunch of thoughts about work in simple bullet point form. He posts it on medium.com. It's really easy, really quick, really simple. And there's a picture of a cute dog on the top of it. What more could you want? Should you make week notes searchable? Yes. Just as much as any good digital content is searchable, ideally your week notes will be searchable. If you're publishing in the public domain, then most of the popular search engines should cover that for you.
Great. I've picked up quite a bit out of this, so I'm gonna try to ask a question at a time. I have about 4 or 5. So the first one is so you started by saying, like, if you write a week notes and someone else, and you're doing a product that's similar to someone else's, that to me sounds like an amazing way of building connections and also pulling off the like pulling away silos, because it's like, oh my gosh, we could work together a little bit to speed up the process.
Yeah, precisely. So I've got this set of rules for week notes that I can't remember whether I mentioned them in the live stream or not. I probably did. The rules are: every team should write a week note. No individual is required to read all of the week notes from all of the teams. And all of the notes should be published in a place where everyone can read them. Those are the 3 rules. The point of doing this is that if every team is writing week notes, then every team is broadcasting its status by default. That's just a thing. If everybody's following these rules, that becomes a thing that applies across your organization. And that's why you need rule number 2, because if you have a large organization and you have many, many teams, then you can't possibly get to a situation where everyone is required to read all the week notes, because that would become a full-time job and no one would get any work done. So that's ridiculous. But instead, what it enables is it lets individuals who are readers of week notes, it lets them aim their focus at the teams or the projects or the categories of work that they are most interested in. So if every team is writing week notes, and let's say I'm on a particular team and you're on a particular team, and I discover, because your team is doing something that's vaguely that overlaps with my team's work, and I discover that because I can see maybe you're using the same categories as me when you post your stuff on the internet. Maybe your stuff is as searchable as mine, and I search for stuff, and I find that you're writing about the same thing. Or maybe you link to one of my posts, or I link to one of yours. Whatever the spark is, there is an opportunity there to create connections between teams. And in an ideal world, what I like to think could happen is that teams that are overlapping could find each other earlier, because week notes will enable that, because week notes are a broadcast mechanism.
I really, really like that. So then my second question is, we write quite formally in government a lot of the time. And back to the title of this conversation, Humanizing Communications in Organization. So this is this like writing into a journal or something like that? Like I was going to say diary as well, like just really casual writing. It's not prescriptive writing, maybe in the middle somewhere.
Here's the thing, right? Here's a thing I've noticed in lots of work situations is very often people will say to me, we wrote this report, or we've got this paper and it really matters to us. but the intended audience didn't read it. Or they picked it up and they flicked to the summary, and maybe they took in the summary, but they didn't actually read the content, which is a shame because we spent weeks making it. The problem is, and they say this to me using almost exactly the same words that I have just described, right? They talk to me in a very informal, relaxed way, because usually we're in a meeting room or we're on a video call like this. And when people talk to each other face to face, they automatically default to an informal, relaxed way of communicating. But also, those same people, when you ask them to type something on a computer, far too often they will default to a completely different way of communicating. They will suddenly start injecting loads of superfluous words, loads of passive voice, loads of mixed tenses, loads of capital letters that shouldn't be there. All of this stuff, right? To be honest, I blame the school system, certainly in the UK here, that the education system trains school children and then university students and undergraduates to write in a particular way, and then spits them out after their years of education into the world of work. And these youngsters think, oh, right, well, every time I'm typing, I now need to type like that. And that's what I'm railing against a lot of the time. I say, no, it's a better way to communicate in text if you write it more like you speak it, which is an old saying from Hemingway, if not from older than that. And it surprises me how hard people often find that. And it's because I think they have spent years and years and years being trained to write in a formalized way. And I'm saying, ignore what you've learned, unlearn what you've learned, write the way you speak. People find that difficult. That's why when I'm suggesting that people try it, there are various tactics or techniques they can use. The best way to write like you speak is to write by speaking. And that's to literally walk away from the computer, go for a walk, take a dog if you've got one, talk to the dog. I've written some of my best stuff with conversations with dogs. Because if you go for a walk and you talk to a dog or you talk to a tree or you talk to a brick wall, it doesn't matter. Say what you want to communicate out loud. And if you really come up with some great lines, just scribble them on a piece of paper or record them into your phone or something like that. And then come back and type those lines into your document. And already you've got the beginnings of your first draft. And that's what you should build on. So writing this way is beneficial because readers find it easier to read. If you ever read some of the higher end news publications, in the UK, I'm thinking particularly of the Financial Times or The Economist, particularly The Economist. The Economist is written incredibly well and is written like speech. And you only have to listen to the audio version of The Economist to hear how well it has been written. And what's more, the other thing about The Economist is it's full of jokes. All of their picture captions are terrible puns. They are not afraid to take the mickey out of world leaders by making jokes at their expense in The Economist. That's what makes The Economist so readable. It's because it is a newspaper of record, but it's also written the way that people speak.
Yeah, I like both of those things. One, I walk my dog and I talk to him. Hopefully he's helping me with my thinking all the time. I feel he is. And I do think that's a really good way to connect into the writing. Cats, any animal, it's fantastic. And also we have The Economist magazine. I like them for the same reason. It's just like, it's sticky. I like the word sticky, where it's just like, oh, I can remember that because it's spoken to me in a way that I speak and my friends speak. And so I can remember it. That's a great mnemonic tactic to be able to do this in your own writing.
Absolutely. It never ceases to astonish me how often I have to say to leaders or to organizations or people who hire me that my diagnosis of their communication problem is very often the way you speak it, when you talk about it to me, is completely fine. But the way you've written it down in this paper or this report or whatever it is, that's where your problem is. It's because the two things are not the same. So try to make them more the same. Try to write that document more like the way you spoke it to me.
Yeah, I like it. I hope this is heard in a lot of ways because I like the idea of the week notes, being able to train people to write that way, and it'll affect their speaking, and it'll have better presentations, we'll have better writing. I really like all this. How do you pitch new communication ideas when facing a no one reads it anyway mentality?
Yeah, and I get that quite a lot. There's a few things. The most important is that writing about your work on a regular basis is an investment in team memory. And I'm researching another book. I want to write another book. And the working title of that book is How Teams Remember. Because I have a hypothesis that teams forget things because they don't write them down. Simple as that. An additional hypothesis is that if teams are given the opportunity to write things down on a regular basis, they are more likely as a team to remember those things. There's a very good example of this from the Department for Education here in the UK, where there are a bunch of teams who are writing notes about their work as they go along and posting them on the internet for the precise reason that somebody there has realized that the services will outlive the individuals working on the teams. So those individuals working on a service like, I don't know, that there are services for helping people apply to become teachers, for example. That service is probably going to exist for another 20, 30 years or longer. Nobody's going to be working on it for that long. Those individuals who are working on it now, they will all have gone off to other jobs or retired by then. So how do you leave behind a record of the decisions that were made in the early days of the service? How do the people in the future of the service know what mistakes were made or what experiments were tried and failed, as well as the experiments that were tried and succeeded? What better way to leave a record for the future than to write things down? That's the central premise of my argument. And that's the main reason why I say, yes, it's quite possible that no one reads it today. It's quite possible that the number of hits you get on your week note might be in single figures. The long-term reward, the long-term investment is worth more than the number of hits that you necessarily get. I have an anecdote from another organization that I worked with in recent years where we had exactly this problem. Initially, there were a bunch of product teams. They were asked to write week notes. They tried it for a few months, like 2 or 3 months. And then they went back to their leaders and they said, literally no one's reading this. We can see on, they were using Confluence. We can see on Confluence that no one has read these pages. So we're going to stop writing the week notes. And then there was a lull. Nobody did anything. And then a new block of leadership came in and they asked for week notes again. And the message went back, yeah, we tried that before. No one reads them. And this time the leaders said, we don't care that no one reads them. We want you to write them anyway. And they also implemented rule number 2 in my list of 3, which was no one is required to read all the notes. But what happened was the leadership were empowered to focus their attention where it mattered. And there were 2 or 3 of those teams who were really struggling for all sorts of reasons. And so the leadership were able to say, okay, we're gonna zero in on these teams that are struggling. We won't read everyone else's notes for the next month or so, but these teams, they need help. So we will focus our efforts there. I think that is the best way to overcome that no one reads it anyway thing.
Yeah, it made me think of one of the questions that I forgot was, the no one reading the week notes. That's a big one. I like that you've talked about that a few times. Even if 1 or 2 people read it or no one reads it for a while, it's helping your team's memory. It's helping you onboard in the future. It's helping people see at the end of their career in their position all the great things they've done because they can remember it better because they've written it.
Yeah. I always used to, even at GDS, I always used to get frustrated by conversations around how many hits or page views has a particular piece of work got, a particular piece of comms got. Because I don't think in our line of work, in the world that you and I work in, the number of people watching, listening, or reading to something doesn't matter. We're not here to get to the most number of people. We are here to get a message across to the right people. And that might be an incredibly small number of people. And so as long as the right people are hearing this stuff or reading this stuff or watching this stuff, then that is the most important metric, not how many of them there are.
100%. I really like that. I think that couldn't be a sticker, but it's also going to be a mantra. Okay, so how can we leverage technology and digital platforms to enhance rather than replace face-to-face personal interactions?
Technology can only help you so much, right? The real communication, especially if you're going to be writing the way you speak, especially if you're going to aim your communication at the right people rather than the maximum number of people, then ultimately it's got to come from the heart. One of the things that I often say is that good comms is a mixture of process and poetry. The poetry bit, I don't mean literal poetry. I mean metaphorical poetry, which is almost as meta as it can get, isn't it? But the idea that putting a little bit of creativity into your comms work, just a tiny bit, just a little sprinkling of creativity, gives enormous rewards. And that will do a lot more for you than using the latest shiny tech. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't try the latest shiny tech. Absolutely, you should. Agile comms teams or teams that are making use of agile comms should always try something new if they think it's going to meet the right need and get to the right people. Absolutely, no problem with that. But I don't think the technology is the be all and end all. I'm wondering if this question is also alluding a bit to AI. I have quite low opinions of AI at the moment. I don't think it's very helpful at the moment for most teams most of the time, mainly because AI can give you something very generic and it's fine. You know, you could copy and paste that and use it somewhere. But anyone reading that text is usually, their eyes are going to glaze over after a paragraph or two. They're not really going to be reading it and paying attention to it. So I don't think AI is a big help either.
Great, because that's talked about a lot.
Yeah.
How do you balance compassion and inclusivity in communication?
I think both of them, compassion and inclusivity, are absolutely vital. Having compassion for the readers, for the audience at the other end, is the most important thing. And that's almost like another way of describing meeting their needs, and relates back to the point that I used to open my book with, which is that everybody is already too busy most of the time. That's the assumption that I start the book with. Your problem as somebody trying to communicate anything to anybody is making them pay attention to you in the first place, because everyone is too busy to pay attention. So having compassion for these people who don't have time, who are already overwhelmed, is the most important thing that you need to do. I worked not that long ago for an organization where it became clear to me after a little while that the problem that the teams had was that the leadership level was totally overwhelmed. The leadership level were asking for updates, they were getting updates, and then they were forgetting them. Or even worse, they were mixing them up. They were conflating numbers from team A and team B in their head because they had so much coming into them, and their heads were just exploding with so much information, so much data. They could not keep it all in their head. Having compassion for your leaders, for example, was a really useful thing in that particular organization, and helping the teams realize that they needed to split their communication into layers effectively to provide a really simple overview layer before going down into detail, and making that overview layer easier to get to, easier to find by leaders who actually probably just needed to be able to click a link on a Friday afternoon to remind themselves, what's this team doing again? I've forgotten. I know I spoke to them 2 weeks ago, but since then I've had 2 weeks of back-to-back meetings and I can't remember anything. So help me. So helping those leaders, or helping the other people that you're communicating with, whoever they are. Inclusivity is absolutely part of this as well, making sure that your work, your communication efforts are completely accessible to all the people who need to see them. That's like a given as far as I'm concerned. That should just happen without you needing to think about it, although you do need to think about it. You need to put the effort in to, do things like put proper captions on videos and all of that stuff.
There's so much in there, but I'm just going to say the compassion for leaders is a huge one. I just think on a regular, I'm like, you have to almost be photographic to be a upper level executive, because there's so much coming at you all the time, and no matter what notes you take, it's a constant bombardment, and of course things fall out because it's too much.
Yeah, and I've seen far too many leaders in that position who one of the reasons that they are so stressed is that not only is the bombardment of information just endless, it almost becomes pointless, because they don't have these superhuman abilities to keep all this information in their head. So the teams in those circumstances need to proactively do something to make the information easier to find and reach and get to and take in.
This has been a fascinating conversation. Curious, do you have any final thoughts?
Just one. One of the things that I'm often saying to teams as my one piece of advice is write less more often. And that is also totally a sticker idea. One of the things that teams complain about when people like me come along and start saying things like, oh, you should be using blog posts, you should be writing week notes, all of the stuff, is the teams say, yeah, we're busy too. We don't have time. To which I say, well, don't put much effort into it. Lower the bar. If your team, as a group, all of you as a team, only spend 15 minutes a week on writing a week note, then you're already doing better than teams who don't write any week notes at all. And 15 minutes a week from one team is plenty to write a handful of bullet points. And that's all you need to do most of the time. So don't put too much effort into it, but do it regularly. Write less, more often.
Before you said that, I was like, week notes. Okay, so I at least have to put an hour to 2 hours in a week. Thank you for creating the box that it's really only 15.
Yeah. 15 minutes a week, half an hour at the absolute most, but ideally not that long.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Giles, for taking the time to share your thoughts. To the listeners, I hope you enjoyed the episode, Bridging the Gap, Humanizing Communications in Organizations. You can connect with me at ari.hirschberg@gov.bc.ca or click the link in the show notes. Thanks for listening.